الحمد لله الواحد الأحد الفرد الصمد الذي لم يطلع على غيبه أحد ولم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولد سبحانه. الحمد لله الأول والحمد لله الآخر والحمد لله الظاهر والحمد لله الباطن. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا، أنت تجعل الحزن إن شئت سهلا. اللهم إنا نسألك في هذا اليوم العظيم أن ترحمنا وتتقبل منا وأن تردنا إليك ردا جميلا لا انتقام فيه يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم ثبتنا على الإسلام وعلى الإيمان وعلى اتباع سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم خير قدوة أرسلت للناس. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a guideline, a standard by which we can live. He says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ومن أحسن قولا ممن دعا إلى الله وعمل صالحا وقال إنني من المسلمين. Who is in a better position than someone who invites to Allah all his life? Invitation to Allah. Everything he does is an example so that you can see that he is inviting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا, and his deeds are good. His deeds are good. عَمِلَ صَالِحًا is not just did it one time. His deeds are good. Whatever he does is good. وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, and he proclaims proudly, loudly, clearly, not hiding it. He proclaims, I am among those who submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the best position that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described in this verse. And this is the standard to which we should attain in our life. Clearly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in many different places of the Quran gives us different definitions and different valuations or evaluations. And when we talk about how to evaluate something, we talk about its value. So you want to buy a car, you say what its value, right? Its value is $10,000, $20,000, that's the value. You find another car that's the same specification but lesser price, that's a better value, correct? So value is the relative position of something compared to the one who is valuating it. In Surah Al-An'am is a very unique verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us. He says, قُلْ إِنَّنِي هَدَانِي رَبِّي. Say, and of course it's addressing Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, but it's also addressing all of us. Every single person who reads the Quran, when you read قُلْ, he's talking to you. When the Quran is asking a question, أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ, he's asking you. You should respond. You say, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is أحكم الحاكمين. Right? قُلْ, say, إِنَّنِي هَدَانِي رَبِّي. My master, my Lord has guided me. Has guided me to what? إِنَّنِي هَدَانِي رَبِّي إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ, to a way that's very clear, very straight, very obvious. What is it? دِينًا قِيَمًا, a way of life full of values. قِيَمًا. In another place, Yusuf alayhi salam, when he's talking to his two companions in the prison, he says, ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمُ. That, or what I just described to you, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the way to evaluate. But in this verse, in Surah Al-An'am, number 161, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, دِينًا قِيَمًا, a religion of values, a way of life of values, based on values. Where did we get this from? Millata Ibrahim. This is the way of thinking of Ibrahim. He is the first one who established this way of thinking. When he searched for the Lord, for the God, for the creator of the universe, he applied values. He saw the stars, and then he noticed that the stars come and go. He says, no, that violates the value of a God. The God has to be valued. It's permanent. He doesn't move. When he compared the stars to the moon, he says, oh, this is better. And then he thought about this. He says, no, that violates the values again, mental values that he set for a methodology, basically. A method of thinking, a method of verifying that his process of thinking is correct. In modern terminology, when I do consulting in businesses, I call it quality assurance. So we talk about the quality of assurance of the decision-making process. We talk about the quality assurance of the manufacturing process. We talk about quality assurance of the customer service, and so on. So this is the quality assurance. The Quran calls it qiyaman. These are the values you use to verify that you're thinking correctly. Dinan, this is a way of life, a way of thinking, a worldview, a cosmology is what we call it. Dinan qiyaman. Millata Ibrahim. Hanifan. Hanif is a very interesting word because it is used in describing Ibrahim alayhi salam. If you go back and decompose the Arabic root of the word Hanif, it means swerve. It's as if you're going down the traffic and you see a congestion ahead of you and you swerve. You take a deviation from the road you were on. Why did Ibrahim do this? Because everybody in his time was following the idol worshipping ways, the ways of those who sell idols, who promoted idols. And I'm not just talking about the physical idols, because those who were selling the idols were convincing people mentally of the value of worshiping these idols. You would not spend money on a stupid little granite or wooden statue unless somebody put in your head already beforehand the idea, the conviction that there is some value in parting with your money for that idol. That's the evil of the idol worship sellers. That's the evil of those who want to manipulate your mind. Islam teaches us if you follow the values, your mind will be liberated. Your mind will be free. Your mind will be directly connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who set these values as the best way. Dinan qiyaman millata Ibrahima hanifan. He swerved away from the main path which his people were following, which was idol worshipping. وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. He was not among those who confused his values. He was not among those who associated the values from Allah with the values of human beings for their own interest. In other words, using the terminology that we use today, he did not confuse values with interests. Pay attention to this word, because today we live at a time where everybody is claiming, I have the right to defend my interests. Whereas there was a time where the primary directive for nations, among the advanced world at least, was to promote the values for which we stand. Now we defend our interests. Makes sense? And this is a significant derailment. A significant derailment away from the success that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised to those who follow those values. You see, the concept of values is something that this country was founded on. So when you read the Declaration of Independence by the founding fathers, you might as well be reading a declaration of universal human values. Freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are human values. And we collectively, this country, we were committed to these values. Until the Soviet Union, the opponent, the adversary, fell out of the picture. And now the opponent became from inside. The opponent became from inside. And to be honest with you, this country right now is deviated from the original historical path that has caused or brought to this country victory. The same country which fought in World War II to defeat fascism and oppression and tyranny, and immediately after World War II instituted the Marshall Plan to rebuild the nations that were destroyed because of the war. That's values. Now we're following interests. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us that you have to be careful of shaitan. ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين. Did I not have a pact with you, O descendants of Adam, that you should not worship shaitan, because he is for you the primary enemy. He is the enemy. إنه لكم عدو مبين. And this is a very detailed differentiation between إنه عدو لكم. He's an enemy for you. No, he is for you the enemy. إنه لكم عدو مبين. He is the enemy you should watch out for. Even in the worst conditions, when we are dealing with a fight, as in Surah Muhammad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is a surah that was revealed almost after the middle of the Medina period, so in the last few years of the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we cannot claim this was abrogated. This is a surah that came very late, relatively. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching the Muslims, the believers, how to deal, even in the toughest times, how to follow the values. In Surah Muhammad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us, فَإِذَا لَقِيتُمْ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. When you face those who are in disbelief, who fall into disbelief, who want to cover up the truth. فَإِذَا لَقِيتُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَضَرْبَ الرِّقَابِ. You're allowed to smite the neck, smite to hit. حَتَّى إِذَا أَثْخَنْتُمُوهُمْ. Until when you overwhelm them totally. فَشُدُّوا الْوِثَاقِ. Tie the prisoners. Then فَإِمَّا مَنًّا بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ وَإِمَّا فِدَاءً. And then either you release them out of generosity or in exchange. Very strange. This is the Quran talking this way. This is the same Quran they accuse of being a violent religion and violent promoter and so on. No, this is in Surah Muhammad. Why? The Quran gives us the answer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us the value of behaving this way. حَتَّى تَضَعَ الْحَرْبُ أَوْزَارَهَا. So that war itself puts down its burden, puts down the stress, puts down the tension, puts down the stance of fighting. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is assigning consciousness to war. War has consciousness, of course, in many different places. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala assigns consciousness to various things. In Surah Al-Kahf, as Prophet Musa alayhi salam was questioning the good teacher, why did you rebuild this wall? And the teacher says, فَأَمَّا الْجِدَارُ فَكَانَ لِغُلَامَيْنِ وَأَرَادَ أَن يَنْقَضْ. أَرَادَ. It wanted to fall. The wall wanted to fall. So of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts a will, a desire in inanimate objects, and including the war. So this verse, حَتَّى تَضَعَ الْحَرْبُ أَوْزَارَهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is assigning the blame not on the opponents who are fighting. Is assigning the blame on war itself. War itself is a mechanism used by shaitan, by our enemy. What is your purpose, O Muslims? To help diffuse the situation as much as possible. You take prisoners of war, you release them either out of gratitude or in exchange. Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, in the situation where he was at, unfairly thrown in jail, he was asked to interpret the dream of the king. 7 fat cows being eaten by, and I've talked about this a little bit before. But here we notice that he applied a very strange way of thinking. He had the opportunity to trade his freedom for being able to interpret that dream. But the Quran tells us he did not do so. He interpreted the dream. He interpreted the dream. When the messenger came the first time, he told him, the king has seen this type of dream and the cows and the stalks of wheat. And he told him, you're going to have 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of drought, and then followed by another final year, 15th year, where you can recover. And therefore, you have to save during the first 7 years for the next 7 years. The question is, did he put any condition on his offering his services? Of course not. The value that he was demonstrating is that to benefit mankind is more important than to suffer the oppression or the tyranny against one person. His person. He was allowing the benefit to mankind to come ahead of his own comfort level. Later on, the king says, قال الملك ائتوني به, bring him to me. فلما جاءه الرسول, when the messenger from the king came to Yusuf, of course he told him, the king wants to meet you, you're free. قال, Yusuf said, ارجع إلى ربك, go back to your Lord, to your master, to the king. واسأله فاسأله ما بال النسوة اللاتي قطعن أيديهن. Have him inquire about the event that I was falsely accused of and that landed me in jail. Now we ask another question. Very weird behavior from Yusuf. Why did he not take the first opportunity to get out? The king is summoning him, sending for him. But Yusuf had another value that he was applying. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us with this story. The value that as a messenger, as a man of God, as a person who is charged and given the mission to do da'wah for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your reputation has to be spotless. He needed to make sure that he cleaned his reputation in front of the king because he knew he was about to have a very critical role in support of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And indeed, the king investigated, and a second time he sent for him, and this time Yusuf went. The values that we are tasked with understanding in Islam. If we understand the concept of values, we must understand how we fall into a situation where I call it the dysregulation of your consciousness. Your consciousness stops working correctly. How do you fall into that situation? How do you trip, or how are you tripped by shaitan to fall into a situation where you no longer think correctly? And the answer, inshallah, we will talk a lot more in the evening seminar, which I hope you received the announcement starting at 5 o'clock. The science of shirk. This is a form of shirk. We call it the dysregulation of consciousness, or dysregulation of applying standards and values. This is the modern language. The Quran calls it shirk, because shirk is to associate non-godly values with interests, with your lively interest, the interest of this life. And sometimes there is no conflict between the two, but sometimes there is a conflict. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. استغفر الله. الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. Human being has been created weak, with weakness. وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us in all over the Quran about something called hawa, your caprice, your desire to choose one way versus another, without any guidelines or regulatory process in your mind, without any intellectual discipline, without what's called integrity. As a matter of fact, I define Tawheed. Tawheed, oneness of Allah, which to believe in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to integrate everything you do to be pointed in the direction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's Tawheed. So you integrate and unify all your values. And we are so easy to manipulate. We are so simple to overlook. It's so possible for us to overlook how we think and whether or not we should or should not do something. I'll give you a couple of quick examples that may be of interest to you. When they train elephants for the circus, all of us hopefully have enjoyed going to the circus and enjoyed watching these huge beasts that obey commands and follow the orders and the commands of their trainers. And you must wonder, how did they get the elephant to be constrained, to be actually agreeable to stay where he's told to stay, to be led by a simple rope? And the truth is, they bring the elephant when that elephant is very small, very young, a baby, really small. And they tie the leg of that elephant with a heavy metal chain. They tie it into a single place. And no matter how hard that baby elephant tries to break free, he finds that this chain is not breakable for that baby elephant. Of course, if they do this to a large elephant, he would yank it in no time. There aren't any chains that are heavy enough, correct? But the baby elephant gets used to that chain, gets used to the feeling of something tied against his leg, gets used to the concept of servitude and limitation on the freedom. This is called paradigm, mental frame, mental cage. After a while, they replace that metal chain with a simple rope, and the elephant just feels a little tug, and he just gives up and follows where the rope takes him. And literally, he lives the rest of his life, with few exceptions that we've seen on TV. Most of the elephants live the rest of their life refusing to break that simple chain, that simple rope that's tied to their leg. That's mental imprisonment. Stephen Biko, one of the companions of Nelson Mandela, the famous, activist from South Africa. One of his companions in the 70s, he has a very beautiful saying. He's less known than Nelson Mandela, but he was a very established leader of the South African freedom movement. He has a very beautiful saying. He says, "There is no more potent weapon in the hand of the oppressor than the mind of the oppressed." There is no more potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor than the mind of the oppressed. We are living at a time where devious people, even scientists, have turned all sorts of these concepts into a science. So we are living and bombarded constantly by advertising, by marketing using sneaky ways to get us to change our behavior one way or another. But these are not just benign results. They are not benign results. And I'm going to share with you, inshallah, we will close in a few minutes, this couple of sad examples. Of course, in the last 2 weeks, California has suffered from the wildfires that are going on in the northern part of the state, north and central part of the state. And to date, as far as I figured out, the latest number of victims, may Allah give them mercy and give their families ease of their pain, that number is in excess of 63 people. The number of people who are unaccounted for is in excess of 650 people. Very tragic events. But as sad as those events are, there is something that drew my attention that was even more serious and more sad and more premonitious of a future that's scary for all of us. Please listen carefully so you don't misunderstand me. I have very few minutes left. Inshallah, I will relate to you this example. A person an ex-military person called Ian David Long entered into a bar in a suburb of Los Angeles called Thousand Oaks and killed randomly 12 people without blinking an eye. Injured another 12. The whole episode took about 20-25 minutes. So far, we've seen this event many times before, sadly. But that's not the scary part. The scary part is what happened in the middle of that event. He stops, he has his cellular phone with him, and he opens Facebook. In the middle of the shooting, he is locked up inside the bar, people bleeding all around him. He opens up his Facebook, writes the following, quote unquote. I'm quoting him verbatim. Fact is, I had no reason to do it. And then he continues, I thought, expletive, life is boring, so why not? Now, you might want to think about this and say, this is a psychopath. Until you understand that this person gave the reason. First he said, I had no reason. And he gave a reason for entertainment. Killing people for entertainment. The job of this person in the first and the second tour overseas was a gunman, a gunner. It's called a gunner, a person who actually operates guns. Now, why is this relevant? This is relevant because I want you to associate it in your mind with another phenomenon that is affecting our society. This is our society, and we should be affected by it. We should worry about this. We should be concerned about the young men and women who are dying for the wrong reasons and who are acting for the wrong reasons. The second phenomenon that I want you to associate with this phenomenon is the fact that today, by the end of today, 20 military service people, active and veterans, would have committed suicide. Tomorrow, another 20. The day after, another 20. Every 4 months, more people kill themselves from a military background than people who died in 9/11. Almost 700 people a month. And this number started increasing dramatically since 2004. So what happened in 2004? Actually, what happened was in 2001 when the military doctrine was changed. America had lost the opponent, which was the Soviet Union, and changed course to protect its interests, no longer defend the values. And therefore, now we started training people. And this is not just happening in the military, by the way. Don't ever misunderstand what I'm saying, that this is criticism of the military. No, it's a criticism of a society that has introduced what's called systemic shirk. Systemic shirk. Where did we learn this from? We learned it from a book by, please bear with me, this is just too important to pass up. In a book that was published called Eichmann in Jerusalem. I really highly recommend you read it. This is written by a philosopher called Hany Atchan, A-R-E-N-D-T. And she talked about the trial of Adolf Eichmann. Who was Adolf Eichmann? He was a Nazi leader under Adolf Hitler who escaped after World War II and went to Argentina, and then he was snatched by a bunch of Israeli agents and took him back to Jerusalem, put him on a trial, and eventually executed him. Hannah Arendt, in her book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, criticized not the fact that he was snatched, not the fact that this was extrajudicial, and so on and so forth. She criticized the fact that this person, Eichmann, claimed, and his defense all along was, I was following order. I was doing my job. I had nothing against the Jews, nothing for the Jews. I had no reason to do it. Fact is, did you hear this? Fact is, I had no reason to do it. I was just following orders. We are all possibly subjected to similar situations every day, today. We are just following orders. I just do my job. I have no concern with what damage the product that I produce may do to other people. I am just earning a living. This is halal work. So you see, systemic shirk is about a whole bunch of people involved in a systemic way. Every single one of them is doing something right, but collectively the system is causing a lot of harm. This is one example of many, inshallah, we will share tonight when we meet, like I said, at 5 o'clock. I hope that we can see all of you starting at 5 o'clock. This is called the Science of Shirk, Pathways to a better application of our consciousness in accordance with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that we can come back to the very first verse I started with. وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. Who is in a better position than someone who invites Allah and his deeds are good and proclaims that he is among those who submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is an invitation to all of you, my brothers and sisters, and myself, to remember not to fall into the traps of shaitan, into shirk, which has so many different ways of attacking us. And inshallah, the seminar will help us see some of the benefits or some of the ways we could fall into the traps. I hope to see you inshallah tonight, and make dua with me inshallah. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك لنا يا ربنا فيما أعطيت واقض عنا شر ما قضيت إنك تقضي بالحق ولا يقضى عليك. اللهم ارحمنا وتقبل منا واجعلنا من أهل الجنة. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. عباد الله إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما وأقيموا الصلاة.